Well, hi, everybody. I'm Meg Tirrell here with Health Secretary Alex Azar. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for being with us for this conversation.
Hey, Meg, great to be with you. Thanks for having me, and really glad to be with an event with Milken Institute. Mike and the work he does and the great work of the Institute really are a valuable partner to us, especially as we've been going through COVID. And so just want to express my public appreciation for the Milken Institute.
Well, let's talk about where we are, of course, with COVID. Heading into the colder months, we're at 55,000 cases on average per day and rising, heading into what a lot of people are calling sort of a third surge. What do you see when you look forward to the fall and winter? What do those months, do you think, look like for the pandemic in the U.S.?
Yeah, so we're seeing an increase in cases. I think we're on about a 14% 7-day rolling average increase in cases. We're seeing that primarily in the Midwest, upper Midwest, the plains, upper plains areas, but also just really across states. We've got a large number of jurisdictions with increasing cases. And then when you have increasing cases, you're going to see increasing hospitalizations. So we're seeing that also. And we believe that a lot of this is driven by some of the phenomenon that, frankly, we saw back in June coming out of the Memorial Day holidays, which is in the Southeast and Southwest. We saw basically a southern version of winter, which is with a lot of heat. People go indoors into air-conditioned settings. You lose the natural social distancing that comes from out of doors. The thing that we are concerned about, of course, is in the northern climates right now, especially as it gets colder, we lose some of that natural social distancing that comes from being in the backyard, being at outdoor dining. People move indoors, they move to indoor gatherings. And so just like you do with flu season, you lose some of that natural protection from natural social distancing. And we've seen a great deal of community spread from household gatherings. So just people having friends and neighbors and family members over and not practicing the precautions of, washing your hands, watch your distance, and wearing your facial coverings when you can't watch your distance because you think in your home you're safe, you think with people you're safe. We try to remind people that you can get disease from people that you're related to, as well as from people you're friends with, as well as from neighbors, and you can transmit to them. And it's not a unique phenomenon, Meg. We're seeing this in Europe right now. It's the same mitigation fatigue, I think, leading to a lot of folks dropping their guard. And we're just asking people to please recommit to some of these basic public health measures because we're seeing those increase in cases. And without these steps, we'll see continued increases of cases.
Right. And you mentioned household gatherings. I mean, we're heading into the holiday season. Everybody wants to be together for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for every holiday coming up. What do you tell people when cases are rising like this about what to do?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, follow the advice of your state and local authorities in terms of gatherings. Second, follow the CDC guidance, and we're going to keep putting out information and guidance around what to do. But just use common sense. Thanksgiving, Christmas gatherings, again, your immediate household members, of course, you're already exposed to, you're exposing to each other in terms of infectious disease. You want to assess the circumstances in your community in terms of how much is disease spreading in your community. Do you have individuals coming to any festivities that are from an area that has higher disease spread? And just some of those basics, again, washing your hands, watching your distance, even at home, even with family gatherings, watching your distance, setting things up in a way that set you up for success, and wearing face coverings when you can't social distance. And so just being very careful, especially being mindful of if you have vulnerable people in your household or in the households of those that are going to be joining you. I hate to say it because people have really, people have sacrificed a lot over the last many months. And so I know that there's a desire to reconnect socially, but we've got to carry forward being careful with each other right now, even as we enter in the holiday season.
Yeah, I mean, numbers have been going in the wrong direction, obviously. And, this guidance you've been saying, other health officials have been saying, distance, wear masks, wash your hands when you can. Does it require some other action when this is obviously not working? People have pandemic fatigue, mitigation fatigue, whatever you want to call it. Do we need more of a national directive to try to change the trajectory here?
So Meg, I don't believe so, and I actually think that would be counterproductive because, again, precisely because of the fatigue issues. I don't think things like national mandates end up proving useful because people are going to comply or not comply based on whether they have bought into the need for the interventions. We see this in Europe. So Western Europe has some of the strongest force of law community mitigation measures and have had. And yet they're experiencing cases per million that are vastly higher than the United States across Europe. I mean, some countries like Belgium are almost 3 times the US rate of infection right now. France is well over us, UK is well over us, Spain well over us. Many of them have very strict controls. People in open democracies will behave as they will. And it's more important to try to educate, get their buy-in, and get people to understand that these simple measures, washing your hands, watching your distance, wearing your face coverings, when you can't watch your distance, these are your ticket actually to freedom and re-engagement. I try to describe this to people who resist masks or resist these public health measures, that think of these not as restrictions, but think of them as empowering tools. It's your way to go back to school. It's your way to stay at university if you're there. It's your way to be going to church or synagogue. It's your way to be reconnected with healthcare, getting screenings and elective health procedures. It's your way to be re-engaged in political, civic, community life and be reconnected with friends. So I try to think of this as these as empowering tools as opposed to controls and acting upon people.
Well, it's such an important public health message. And, you just mentioned people's willingness to do these kinds of things really comes down to their amount of buy-in to the need for them. On that front, I mean, talk to us about the messaging from the government and why not have CDC be out front on this? I mean, I've been a health reporter for a decade, and in every health emergency I've covered, it has been the CDC out there almost every day, multiple times a week, doing press briefings, being the key messenger, really, from the government on public health. Why are they not the key messenger here?
Well, Meg, CDC has a vital and important role and does provide, of course, guidance out there that is CDC's guidance. But, Meg, you've got, as you mentioned, a distinguished career covering health events, but never one like this. This is an unprecedented pandemic, really probably unprecedented for almost 103 years. And so it demands a whole of government response, whole of government communications. And so those happen across the US government, not just one agency. Let me give you an example. So the CDC obviously is the world's premier epidemiological organization. It's the organization on which they actually take the name of European CDC. They use that brand even. It's so important. But that's an epidemiological public health approach. There also, even just within my own department, there are many other perspectives that have to be brought to bear with a pandemic of this magnitude. For instance, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Agency, bringing to bear important mental health, behavioral health considerations in addition to those that are purely about infectious disease spread. This is such a large national emergency. All of those perspectives have to come to the fore. It's very different even from an H1N1 situation or even from the Ebola outbreak, where you might have the CDC as the only spokesperson or the only entity talking. This is genuinely impacting the entirety of our economy, all of our lives, more than just about a virus or a disease.
But as you were just saying, if we all implemented these public health measures, we would get through this faster and we would be able to get back to more normal life. So why not have the public health agency that's telling us how to get through this fastest be the messenger?
Well, they talk about it. We talk about it. We're all out there. I was on Meet the Press this weekend. Dr. Fauci, as you might have noticed, was on TV. He's on TV all the time. Dr. Redfield's out there. Dr. Hahn, Dr. Birx is touring, goes around the country, dealing with a lot of our regional outbreaks. So we're out there. We're providing direct access to our leading top docs for the media and for the public. So that's what we've been trying to do really from day one here.
Well, the issue of herd immunity, of course, has come up in the last few weeks, with some believing that the White House has espoused that view. I heard you on Meet the Press yesterday telling Chuck Todd that's not the national plan to reach herd immunity before we have a vaccine. I talked with a lot of epidemiologists and public health experts to try to hear what they wanted to hear from you in this conversation. And many of them said, we want to know what the national plan is. Can you tell us, what is the national plan for getting us out of this pandemic, for trying to contain the disease before we have a vaccine?
Absolutely. So let me phrase it in a bit of time sequence here. So of course, initially, our core strategic objective at the beginning was to, and I said this publicly, was to delay and flatten the curve, as it would. We knew that even with all of our containment measures, that it would come here to the United States, because there was no way. I said this at the beginning of February. You can't hermetically seal off the United States, but you take these aggressive containment measures, the ones the president took that were unprecedented in terms of movement control and travel, that would delay and flatten the curve in terms of its spread here in the United States, to maximize the odds that we can remain within the health system capacity here in the United States. So that was the core initial objective. And we used that time to build up our personal protective equipment supplies, to build up our health system capacity, build up our ability to flex and expand our ICU beds. And over that time, what have we done? We've now stockpiled. Our hospitals have 30, 60, 90-day PPE supplies. We now have 3 therapeutics, Remdesivir, steroids, convalescent plasma, that we can use to treat people. We've dramatically altered the profile of our ability in terms of mortality profile, in terms of the success of our ability to treat people. People age 70 and above went from about a 30% chance of fatality just from being infected in April to now below 10%, and if not even more than that today. So we've made incredible progress there on increasing our capacity to deal with the crisis and improving our health system capacity, improving our ability to care, reducing mortality, bringing therapeutics, and investing in and driving the next generation therapeutics, monoclonal antibodies and vaccines, which I'm sure we'll talk about through Operation Warp Speed. And then driving to that day. Right now, what are we doing? Reduce cases, reduce hospitalizations, reduce mortality. That's the key until we can get to monoclonal antibodies, which of course feed into the reduced hospitalizations and reduced mortality, and vaccines, which will reduce actual case spread to the point that we would hope to get to eventual national herd immunity from vaccination programs. So that's our strategy. It's very clear, and that's the approach the U.S. government has as the national coronavirus strategy.
Vaccines, we're getting very close to what we've been told, at least from Pfizer, could be the first efficacy data in just a few weeks. Moderna is modeling November potentially for their data. Tell us, when will it be that you think we will have a vaccine, the first rollout for the first people, and then when will it be that everybody who wants a vaccine can get one for COVID-19?
Yeah, so Meg, as you know, we don't have any control over when a vaccine trial will read out. It's very different than a therapeutic trial, say, where you might have disease burden and it's about enrolling people in the trial, and you'll get an outcome really within days because you can see the clinical endpoints on it. These are some of the largest vaccine clinical trials ever orchestrated, 30,000 people per product in these clinical trials minimum. And as you know, the way they work, you put 15,000 people on vaccine, 15,000 on placebo. You have pre-specified statistical endpoints that will determine when you've reached an efficacy point, whether it's a 90% effective vaccine, 75% or 50% effective. That's lodged at the DSMB, the Data and Safety Monitoring Board. And then what has to happen is you basically have to, as they call it, accrue events, meaning you need enough people to get COVID who are in the clinical trial that you then take a look at the DSMB takes a look at the data and determines, have we gotten 90% of the people who have COVID at a certain level of statistical significance, are they in placebo versus 10% or below in active arm? And then that could be a data readout point in terms of demonstrating, say, 90% efficacy. And of course, you have no control over when you'll accrue those events. Pfizer's CEO has said publicly that he might see data readouts as soon as late October. We don't know if that will happen. But obviously, we're all hoping that we'll see data as soon as possible and be able to demonstrate Moderna, Pfizer, both as safe and effective vaccines. We'll be driven by the data and the science on that. What we ought to be talking about is not whether it's next week, 3 weeks from now, 3 days from now, but just what an incredible and historic achievement it is that we are literally talking about the possibility of a company like Pfizer filing for an emergency use authorization by the end of November, literally 10 months after the entry of this virus to the United States. This is historically unprecedented. It is an amazing achievement for the president, for Operation Warp Speed, for our biopharmaceutical industry in the United States, that we even have this in range. Remember back in January when the questions about vaccine first came up, when people talked about 12 to 18 months for a vaccine, they said that would be the most optimistic scenario. I think Dr. Fauci, when I was with him up at NIAID with the president, even said to reporters, everything would have to hit exactly right to be in the 12 to 18 months time frame. And now, God willing, maybe it's even in the 10-month time frame, but again, it'll be driven by data. Now, you asked another question, which is timeline on production and vaccine. When would every American have access? So under Operation Warp Speed, we're producing millions of vaccines as we speak. All 6 of the candidates that we've invested with or contracted with, we are manufacturing at commercial scale right now. We believe we'll have enough vaccine by the end of December to vaccinate the most vulnerable populations in the United States. By the end of January, enough to vaccinate all of our seniors, healthcare workers, and first responders. By the end of March to early April, we believe we would have enough vaccine produced to vaccinate anybody in the United States who wanted to get vaccinated.
And, everything really has been going right so far. It's kind of been amazing to watch. But we have seen a clinical trial hold for AstraZeneca's product here in the United States. It has restarted in countries around the world. What can you tell us about what's going on there? And, is the FDA being more prudent than perhaps other regulators are?
Well, I'd say with regard to not just the AZ clinical trial hold, but the J&J Janssen clinical trial hold, or say the Eli Lilly monoclonal antibody inpatient clinical trial hold, that the American people should feel very reassured actually by these developments, that this shows we're putting patient safety at the center. It shows we're playing this by the book. It shows that FDA is in the driver's seat, making the calls on this, that our biopharmaceutical industry acts in a way that's ethical and independent also, and that we've got many independent checks in it. So with regard to the AZ vaccine, the UK restarted quite some time ago. The FDA has been working with AstraZeneca to get data that the FDA would feel allows it to make its own independent determinations regarding any potential connection between any serious adverse event and the vaccine, and whether any changes or modifications to protocols are required. As we've said, those are going to be calls for FDA to make and the career scientists at FDA. That's how they're proceeding, and I'm not going to either publicly or privately judge them for taking a different or more conservative approach than the UK and other countries have done there. I know that their intent is to look out for patient safety and make sure that when we do get vaccines, there's public trust and confidence in them.
And does the final authority on whether a vaccine makes it to the market here in the United States rest with those career scientists at the FDA?
Yes, I've made it very clear that these will be determinations. The approval of the vaccines or therapeutics are going to be determined by the career leadership of the centers at FDA, along with, of course, Dr. Hahn.
Thinking about Operation Warp Speed, Pfizer, of course, is the one that's given the fastest timeline. Moderna is right on its heels, really. Pfizer did not participate, at least in terms of funding from Operation Warp Speed and the US government for the development of its vaccine, saying that they thought they could go faster if they did it by themselves. How do you kind of look at that? I don't think anybody doubts what Operation Warp Speed has achieved, but the fact that a large company did it essentially on its own as fast or faster than Operation Warp Speed.
Well, you've got to remember, Pfizer was very much early in the process here with the messenger RNA vaccine candidate. So it's not like they leapfrogged. They were also very early on in that. And the mRNA platform is one that's very susceptible to speedier development timelines as well as manufacturing. And so we are happy to work with the manufacturers through any construct that's going to deliver results. And if, as we've done with Pfizer, we have a pre-specified commitment to purchase, and that's the way to incentivize and get speedy production, as well as to work with them on how we can facilitate development timelines. That's a perfectly good approach. But with others, if it's more us being very much linked in and assuming more of the financial risk as you go, we're happy to do that and have done that also. You know, a company like Pfizer, one of the, if not the largest pharmaceutical company on earth, they may not need our working capital in order to be able to run their clinical trials and to de-risk the process as much as possible. And then we are able to be there with the purchase agreement at the end of that process so that they know they've got a market.
Well, as you are sort of reaching the finish line on getting the information about whether these vaccines work, you're also preparing for the distribution of them, which will be an unprecedented challenge in itself. One issue that I've heard might be coming up is the availability of needles, not just for COVID-19 vaccines, but some have brought up the idea that this could actually be affecting the supply chain for flu shots. Has the stockpiling of needles for COVID vaccines affected the flu shot market?
I've not heard any concern in that regard, actually, Meg. I'll certainly look into that to make sure, but no, we're going full speed ahead with the flu vaccination campaign. In fact, we worked with the flu manufacturers to get extra production, I think about 20 million more than originally planned, of flu vaccine, to make sure we'd have plenty as we try to really encourage people to protect themselves by getting their flu vaccine. This is every year, but this year in particular. And so I haven't heard of any concerns about that issue. We, of course, have negotiated supplies of needles for purposes of Operation Warp Speed vaccination programs. I don't know why that would necessarily get in the way, especially as you think about the timelines of when you're doing your flu vaccination campaign and your Operation Warp Speed, a COVID vaccination program, where you're really getting into those types of numbers later in the winter season of 2021. But I've not heard that, Meg.
Well, so we know that plans were due on Friday for states in terms of their distribution planning. I mean, have you seen them, and how prepared are we here? What kind of hiccups could we potentially run into?
So we've now received plans from all 64 of the jurisdictions, states, territories, and of course, as you know, we work with some cities as independent public health departments. So we've received all 64 of them. We're reviewing them now, working with them. But we've had direct meetings. For instance, General Perna, the leader of Operation Warp Speed, and the CDC team have worked with the New York team under Dr. Howard Zucker on New York's planning for vaccine, and very robust discussions, robust planning there. And so that's all moved forward. That was done. Governor Cuomo decided not to participate in any of those processes with his team, but his team, the response I got was that their planning has moved very far ahead, and we're doing that in all of our states and jurisdictions, helping them think about how do you get this vaccine out effectively as we pace it out as it comes off production lines, as FDA authorizes its use.
The states say they need.
And Meg, one big development was on Friday. We announced an arrangement with CVS and Walgreens where they're going to use their capacities and be available to help vaccinate our seniors in nursing homes, which will be really important in terms of swift distribution of the vaccine for those who are most vulnerable.
You know, we've heard from states that they need more funding to be able to implement this rollout. Is that in the works? Will they get more funding to make sure that they can do this?
So they've actually, they do not have a need for additional funding for the rollout of the vaccine program. They actually have received funding for this. They have plenty of resources to manage the vaccine distribution program. And so I've heard through the media only, but not directly from states, about this concern, because we've worked through with them where the funding sources are, and that there is plenty of funding available to meet all of their needs.
Okay, let's talk about therapeutics. You know, the antibody drugs, of course, they've applied for emergency use authorization, Regeneron and Eli Lilly both. This would be potentially for a sliver of patients, because we've only seen results in people who've been recently diagnosed with COVID-19. They're not so sick that they're in the hospital. Tell us about how you see these drugs potentially getting used if and when they reach the market.
So I want to be careful, of course, because those two companies have both publicly acknowledged that they've filed for emergency use authorization, but I want to be careful to not get into too much detail on the nature of the regulatory proceedings that we have. But as we think about monoclonal antibodies generally, if I could step back and just without regard to particular products, talk about how we see monoclonal antibodies fitting in. It's very similar, of course, as we see convalescent plasma, which I think that as we move forward, we're going to see that the promise of these antibody therapies are going to be highest when we get to the patient earlier in the disease progression. Of course, you're going to be able to actually jumpstart the patient's immune system by this antibody infusion, whether monoclonal antibody cocktail or convalescent plasma through a polyclonal. The sooner you're able to get there when you have lower viral loads. Once you get to excessive viral replication, you're going to be more dealing with symptom management than you are with the ability for the antibodies to actually beat back the viral replication on viral load. And so we're going to have to work on how we get these products, whether they're monoclonal antibodies or convalescent plasma, to people as early as possible and as clinically indicated by FDA in the disease progression.
But there's limited supply right now. I mean, Regeneron has said it has 50,000 doses available of its treatment if it gets cleared for market. How will you prioritize who gets it?
So Meg, actually, thanks to the work that we've done through Operation Warp Speed, we of course funded research and development of the Regeneron cocktail back in February. We contracted with them in the spring for manufacturing and commitment of up to 300,000 courses of treatment, depending on the size of the dose. And of course, we're in an outpatient setting. That's a more prolific capacity. And then we also worked using our authorities to assist Regeneron to actually work with Genentech Roche on manufacturing. So as a result of that, as well as the work of Eli Lilly with Amgen on its production, we believe we're looking at well over 1 million courses of therapy between now and the end of the year. So we actually believe that for any clinical indications that would be supported by emergency use authorization, that we've got very significant amounts of supply coming thanks to the early planning work and work we did with these manufacturers.
Right. I think coming online, but depending on when they get cleared, both companies have said these drugs will have to be rationed initially. I only have less than 2 minutes left with you, and I want to ask you about Remdesivir. That was the first drug proven to have a benefit in treating patients with COVID-19, but the World Health Organization Solidarity trial has just questioned how strong that benefit really is. How do you look at those results?
Well, I haven't studied the WHO Solidarity results. I actually just received correspondence from the CEO of Gilead today that I haven't been able to go through in detail because I'm working on a lot of Operation Warp Speed activities today, but presenting a fairly serious challenge to some of the reporting around that trial. We'll look at that, but we certainly feel very strongly about the quality of the emergency use authorization process here. In terms of Remdesivir and its use, we were able to secure 90% of the world's supply of Remdesivir through the end of September, to the point that now we have a surplus in the United States. We've been able to make sure the market is satisfied, and it's now able to go through commercial channels here. And of course, the initial clinical trial information suggested as much as a 1/3 reduction in hospital stays coming from proper administration of Remdesivir, and we'll have to see as we get ongoing data, ongoing real-world evidence, and ongoing clinical trial data, whether that proves to be the case. But we feel very strongly about the support for the EUA originally.
Right. I had about 10 minutes worth of questions for you on testing, and I've got about 30 seconds to ask you. But one of the questions that came up from a lot of the experts I talked with about testing is, should we have more rapid tests? Is there a place for trying to get those even into the home setting for folks to try to stop this pandemic? How do you look at that from a regulatory perspective? Will we have these really simple at-home COVID tests that are cheap and we can take frequently?
So we're already at the point where half of our testing in the United States is point of care, and so that's a remarkable achievement. I mean, think about that: point of care rapid testing. 10 months in, never happened before that you see this kind of diagnostic innovation. And we're seeing more innovation almost every week on testing and adding to our capacities. Now, at some point, I certainly hope we get to the point that you can have self-administered and self-evaluated testing, but you'd have to get FDA validation. We have proxies for that, Meg, right now, which are testing that are individuals self-swab even remotely from home on a video monitor with a clinician supervising the swabbing to make sure it's an accurate sampling. And then we may get to the point where with some of these tests, FDA is willing to actually authorize self-evaluation or administration and evaluation through a video monitor telehealth type approach, or just straight patient adjudication of those results. But FDA is going to have to, the diagnostic companies will have to generate the data supporting that, including human factor studies, and then the FDA will have to find that leads to quality diagnostic results.
All right, the blinking clock is telling me we're out of time, but Mr. Secretary, thanks for being with us.
Thanks a lot, Meg. Good to be with you and all of our viewers.